This is the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast from Advanta IRA, where we show you how to explore investments beyond Wall Street and open your eyes to new options for your portfolio. It's time to take control and give yourself the freedom to choose where you invest your money.
Hi, and welcome to a special edition of the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast. As always, my name is Alex Perny, but we're pleased to welcome on today my colleague Scott Maurer, who is another colleague of mine over here at Advanta, also a licensed attorney in the state of Florida and maybe some other states as well. Sure, you can tell us about that, Scott. But we're here to kind of talk about something that has finally come to fruition on, it's in full force, which is the Corporate Transparency Act, or the Beneficial Ownership Information Reporting Requirement as required by FinCEN. It's probably, hopefully, something that anyone that owns or operates any type of small business has heard about in last year. It came to be finalized. It has reporting requirements beginning January 1 of 2024. We'll get into a few of the specifics about it, but it's very important to understand. A lot of the things that business owners deal with, and especially from a taxation perspective, deal with are monetary penalties, right? If you fail to do something, there's a penalty. Depending on the size of your checkbook, it could be a slap on the wrist, or it could be a really big issue for you. But the unfortunate thing about this is that this is a criminal penalty. You run afoul of the Department of the Treasury for failing to do this. And we'll kind of get into it. Again, I hope everyone's heard about it, but if you haven't, we'll give you a good overview of it. It won't be anything that's, an hour long, but we really want to kind of just drive this home now that we're into, it's hard to believe that we're already 2/3 of the way through January, but just understanding this stuff is out there and whether or not we agree with it. I think Scott and I probably have a general consensus on what we think about it. It's something we got to do, right? Just like none of us want to pay taxes. Again, there's strategies for doing that, and we can certainly help you avoid that with your retirement plans. But it's just something we got to do right now.
If you don't mind, I think one thing is interesting you mentioned already when you think about this, the fact that the penalties are criminal in nature and not civil. I mean, there's certainly things you do are required to do. Obviously not filing your taxes and things like that, or can be with criminal and civil penalties as well. But just kind of interesting, just the failure to provide this information to the government is going to be deemed to be a criminal activity, or basically. I mean, that's what it boils down to. They probably try to couch that language a little bit differently, but that is one important thing I think to note right off the bat that you said. This is not a don't want to do it, pay a fine, and move on. It is serious. So what they're looking to implement with this.
It is very serious, and it's also something to consider is that a lot of times when people think about what you have to do for, let's say, an LLC or any type of S corp, or it's what you're doing with your particular state, that's where up until the beginning of last year it started and stopped, right? You didn't necessarily have to provide beneficial ownership information. You had to provide registered agent, who the manager was, a few other key details, but those things weren't. The states weren't talking to each other. The federal government, if they wanted to go and comb through data, could find some of it out. But, this is really kind of, again, focused on the individual, business owners, small ones. And I'll get into a few of the exemptions. But just a little bit of a background, because I think it's always important to know where the laws that govern us come from. Because the one thing that we can all do in participation in our great experiment is to get out and vote, right? And if you don't agree with something, well, it's important to know where this stuff comes from, because it doesn't come out of a vacuum. The initial construct for this piece of legislation came out of a Democratic representative named Sean Patrick Maloney out of New York. And just kind of an interesting anecdote that this stuff was actually finalized under the Trump administration. Again, not for us to pass judgment on any of the particular political climates, but again, it's interesting to see where this stuff comes from. And then it had a runoff up until last year that finalized it for owners starting in the beginning of 2023. So again, will it change? Will it not? I mean, I haven't heard anything about this kind of being on the chopping block as far as all the executive orders that Trump has signed in his first few days in office. Have you, Scott?
I haven't. That's kind of interesting. All the other different things that he was quick to act on. This was not one of them, especially as we talk about him not casting a wide net, but small business owners typically, I think a lot of them do favor that particular party. You'd think that would be something that they would have had in mind. I don't know if the simple fact that the law, and you're going to get into the history of it right now, is currently kind of on pause with the different decisions in the courts. That maybe that just they have other fish to fry right now, but you'd think that would be something. But again, as you mentioned, it was enacted and came into, it was enacted during that prior administration, January 1st of 2021. So, maybe there's some not wanting to kind of axe your own legislation that was passed. I don't know.
Yeah, but you never know. I mean, with all the infighting between the parties, it was sponsored by a Democratic representative, so maybe there will be some targets to be drawn there. But it's it's interesting from the perspective that this was born from, I think, good intentions, but did it miss the mark is kind of hard to say. The main intention of it is to one, curb on things like terrorism, money laundering, money and assets and different things coming into our country with shell corporations, and the ability to identify who owns these entities that otherwise, previous to this, could operate with a very high degree of anonymity. Certain states offer more than others, but that was kind of the main goal of this, was aimed at targeting, bad things like terrorism, drug cartels. You pick a bad actor that might be trying to move cash or assets through the United States. It, that's who they were targeting. But the unintended collateral damage of this is that, what might, is the ounce of prevention worth, the pound of cure? The inverse of that is what we're getting really kind of worth it. It's hard to say, and I'm gonna get into a few things because people might say, "Oh, well, I'm sure there's some exemptions," and there are, but the exemptions, again, from me, don't sit too well with me, to truth be told, on who gets exempted from this, because it's definitely the people that you think, oh, well, they have the lobbying dollars to fight this, and they definitely do. So,
And I think that might go to your point why maybe it hasn't been something that's been chopped yet, as
yeah.
of this recording, because the small business owners, the sole proprietors out there who this is kind of targeting and putting the requirements on, they don't have the political clout that some of the entities that you're going to mention on the exempted list
Mhm.
certainly do. So maybe that's why this is kind of pushed aside. It's important, obviously, to those listening to this podcast, those who are affected by it, but maybe not as important to those people in power because of the exemption list, which again you can cover here in a second.
Yeah, and again, it's one of those kind of things where the more informed you are can, again, drive your voting decisions and how you engage with your elected officials. And again, my stance on this, and again, broader to Advanta, we don't pick sides, we stay very apolitical, but there are some just kind of hard truths to this. Is that if you don't agree with something, it shouldn't necessarily matter which party it's born from. Your direct involvement in, civics really is what can kind of change this. Be engaged if you really have a problem with it, because the money's out there to keep these kind of things. If they don't affect the people that lobby, then will it really change unless the people out there really kind of push for it? So here's some of the exemptions, right? Not every single entity is required to do this. The big one, and I think most people would agree with it, publicly traded, right? That stuff is very heavily regulated. You can pull up shareholder information for these large public companies. It's required to be published. It's not anything that they have to worry about. It's on the private side of things that this is really aimed for, which again, I think we can kind of understand from that. But some of the big ones: banks, federal and state credit unions, registered money transmitting businesses, which I find kind of odd, because you think about things like Western Union, Amscot. What if you had a small wire business? I mean, that, again, there's a lot of money to be made in that, and they certainly lobby to get it off that. Investment companies or investment advisors register with the SEC, insurance companies, uh, futures trading companies, public accounting firms, uh, pooled investment vehicles that are advised by certain entities. So you could have a small private hedge fund that you don't have to disclose the owners of, or other types of things that are led by what are supposedly good actors. Again, not to say they're good or bad, but they have to be a registered investment advisor, have FINRA licenses. Um, but just, someone can get those kind of licenses and you install them, and it could potentially exempt those entities. So I think we can kind of see how, again, it's the large players, right? Publicly traded companies, people that are, high net worth, even if they have small amounts of owners, can kind of get past this. Where I think people really need to look at the specifics of who this really targets. Basically, you are not exempt. So let's say you don't meet any of those criteria. There are other exemptions. You could be what's called a large operating entity. What's that mean? That means basically that you have 20 or more employees on a full-time basis, and you have over $5 million of gross revenue receipts and sales, and you have to have a physical office location, right? So, a lot of e-commerce people that could target you. If you sell a bunch of stuff on eBay, maybe you have those employees, but you don't have a physical retail location. Again, not the case. So I think everyone can probably look and think of how many businesses do you know that don't meet that criteria. It's basically any small mom and pop location. Think your small car dealerships, your local pizzeria. All these places are again, I say target lightly, but that's who's in the scope of this, right? What are your thoughts on that, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, when you look at it, you said it's the small businesses, it's the sole proprietors. When you start looking at kind of the nefarious side of things, you talk about shell corporations and shell LLCs, and I think that's going to be obviously I think that's where this is geared towards. I don't think they are really wanting to know the, small mom and pop who own a small little convenience store in a small town. I don't think that, obviously that's not what they're looking for. However, that's obviously you're casting the net, you're grabbing those people as well. It's the shell corporations that people are setting up, but then again, people set up entities sometimes. They hide the true identities of who's really in charge or who is going to be held accountable for that. If you set up a company in a state that does not require you to list who the manager is, but simply the registered agent, I'm assuming the registered agent is not the party that's going to be criminal charges brought against. I mean, there's again, we don't know all the how the law is going to be enforced because again, it was enacted, it took effect. But then, early December, there's a pause on it. Then a couple weeks later, it was okay. Now it's back in enforcement. Now, as we stand currently, it's not. So we don't know yet how it's going to truly be enforced. But I guess that's my concern with the law too. Just a general standpoint, this is meant to catch, like you said, terrorists, bad actors, money launderers, people like that. If they're already committing those crimes, what's the likelihood that they're going to comply with this act in the first place? Come after their LLC, try to find them. That's just going to be one other charge. If you think they're money laundering, and you end up catching them for money laundering, it's just going to be just another charge, or you're trying to charge them with this at the outset. But what's their incentive for being truthful? And that obviously they could file this report. Like I said, I mentioned to Alice before we got on that I have my own small business, my own PA account for an attorney. Earlier in 2024, I went ahead and filed. It's just me. It wasn't very onerous, but I uploaded a copy of an ID and that was it. I moved on. What's to stop someone from that process that I went through? Somebody was really looking, a criminal enterprise, wanting to continue to operate as such and not disclose to the government. It's not going to be difficult to do with at least how they have it set up right now. I mean, maybe there's some back end. When people are submitting these forms, they have other things they can check. They can confirm information and then draw red flags to it. But I know that's been a common complaint from some. A common thought with some people. They already have a lot of this information on you anyway. Why are they requiring it? Maybe that's how they're going to catch folks. I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's also kind of there's two parts to that. One, it's like they didn't get Al Capone for murder; they got him for tax evasion, right? Maybe it's the easier thing to kind of bring them in and then build these cases off of.
Right.
Which, again, that may be true. That is not what I get paid to figure out, but that is true. But also, there's kind of two components to that are concerning to me. One is, anything that is put into electronic format can be hacked. The government says they're going to build these robust systems where you're not going to be able to get to it. But again, these kind of things, can be hacked. It's just another, kind of crease or, just a hole that things can get through. And, identity theft is a real concern. And with the digitalization of everything, intercepted bad actors could get it. But also to the other point, and I too have helped a few of my friends' small businesses do this. Since when I told them about it, they were like, "I have to do what?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's not a problem. I'll help you do it. I don't want my friends that are contractors and small business owners to get a knock from FinCEN." But again, it was basically that. Just you put in your information, verify your social, upload a copy of an ID. I mean, it's I'm not going to sit here and tell our listeners on how I would defeat that system, but I think it's easy enough to draw the conclusion of, okay, if that's all that's required, that's basically identity theft in a bottle, right? If these people are already committing crimes, how much more difficult it is for that? Again, they got bigger things to concern and other laws that they're breaking. So, again, the people that are really pumping in this information, again, if you have nothing to worry about, you have nothing to worry about. But again, it just is concerning from my standpoint on, how effective is this going to be? In practice, how detrimental is it also going to be? We make a big deal out of it, but what really is going to be the rub to this? Is it going to be that bad? I don't know, but I
And I
enjoy
think that's the kind of, in a sense, the act was enacted, it went into effect, but when it went into effect January 1st of 2024, I think any company that was formed already had until, I think, 90 days into this year, correct? You had until like March 31st of this year to file if you were already in business. It was companies that were registering new that had to comply within a certain 30 days.
Yeah.
But that also was on or after January 1st.
I'm pretty
So
sure
of this
it was
year.
December
So
31st. I think they had till the end of the year. There might have been an extension because
okay.
of computer systems, but again, in any regard, if you had your entity set up before 12/31 of 23,
Right.
you should probably have already done it. We can certainly wait for the courts to play this out.
Yeah,
And
you're
kind of,
correct. Yeah.
but again, it's
But I
you
guess I guess my point is, like I said, it was you had until say 12/31 of 2024 for an existing business. Well, these acts all were paused by then, so they haven't actually had any chance to take any enforcement yet against non-filers or whatever to even kind of begin to see what that looks like or what information that they have or how they're going to enforce it. It's been simply a challenge against it. Hey, this is not, you're asking for individuals' personal information, something they shouldn't have to disclose. And that's where the courts right now have said, hey, we're gonna put a pause on this while we continue to review it and wait for other challenges. So
Yeah, and there have been two. The main one came out of Alabama, um, which was I have it written down right here, the National Small Business Association v. Yellen, and the district court agreed with the National Small Business Association that it was a violation of First Amendment and other rights. I can't remember what all they said it was a violation of, but again, violation of constitutionally protected rights, and they had a pause in Alabama. But that also kind of comes down to the difference between federal and state level. I mean, think medical marijuana is the easy one to pick on. One state says no, someone says yes. It's again that kind of a little bit of the standoff of case. So like, which set of laws do we want to abide by? It's a little tough. And there was also a challenge in Michigan to the same extent that it was in Alabama. Kind of a funny anecdote, I think, just in general, is that the only state that has on a state level without a particular court case driving it that has adjusted the requirements for it is New York, which is where the bill was born out of. So, again, you got to kind of, find some humor in anything in life. But I thought that was a little bit odd that, New York representative sponsors it, and his state is the first one to kind of retract some of the things that came out of that. So, again, it's a wait and see. But I would encourage people, again, from myself personally and us here at the podcast and Advanta, I encourage everyone to follow the law. If the law is something right now, just do it. It's if you have time to wait. But I think waiting on court cases to matriculate and solve something and just holding off on doing it probably isn't the most beneficial course of action here.
yeah, and one of my concerns really is if it goes back into effect is really the any notice that the government has given. Obviously, Alex, you and I are in the financial industry. We see this kind of stuff does come across our desk. We know attorneys, we know CPAs who mention it in their blogs, their podcasts, whatnot. So we see it. But I'm concerned obviously, but there's a lot of small businesses, individuals out there who they're out there just making a buck. They're not paying attention. Maybe they do their own taxes. They set up their business themselves. They don't have the resources. They don't have the information. I don't know that this, in my opinion, has really been, I know that if I asked some of my family members about it, they'd have no idea what I was talking about.
Yeah,
because they didn't hear it on their own. And so from that perspective, how much when they go, if this does take effect again, enacting this, enforcing this against people who are simply going to say, like, I didn't know. Like, well, sorry, you didn't know. That's, that your job is to know the law, or your requirement as a citizen of this country is to know the law and not violate it. So I think that's, we'll see how things go along. And again, maybe it will be a circumstance where they'll enforce it against some people, and they're like, okay, yeah, this truly is a mom and pop in a small town who just simply didn't know. We're moving on. We're not going to criminally prosecute them. They're really, again, using that as the hammer to get people to report, and that'll help them find, obviously, companies who are going to just try to avoid reporting. I don't know.
Yeah, well, there's two kind of good things about that. One, because it is a criminal violation, you have the presumption of innocence, and if it was run through the IRS and tax court, you have the burden of proving innocence. So at least from the perspective, if you do run afoul of it, you're in a little bit of a better position for defending, your non-filing of something like this. But I'd imagine also from the perspective, there are required disclosures that any particular state gives when filing a registration, and I would imagine that that would be something that states would probably want to disclose to people. I know from a fact when I helped one of my friends just file with Sunbiz as our division of corporations here in Florida, I didn't see anything about it. He also, when I mentioned it to him later that month, I'm like, hey, like, getting close, did you file your BOI report? And he was like, what? And he had a CPA. He has a CPA that does his books and a bookkeeper. And again, it's just, it's not publicly ready enough. I mean, we had Garrett Sutton out of Corporate Direct, an attorney out in Utah that has built over the past year a cottage practice on just dealing with this. And so many people that were on that particular webinar were like, I had no idea. Like, it was just like, this is news to me.
Although, I mean, like I said, I mean, I know you have the presumption innocent, but there are crimes where the ignorance is no defense. If it was, I didn't know, like I wasn't intending to break the law. Well, you did, because and the presumption is you didn't file, therefore you're guilty. That's our proof that you violated this law, as the law requires you to file, and you didn't. As opposed to someone saying, I thought I did, or I thought I did it right, I guess I didn't do it correctly. That's maybe a different defense. But if you didn't file, you didn't know you should file, that's something you were supposed to know. So I guess I think there's some dangers. I mean, I would like to think that this is something that will just is going to go away. I know that right now the Fifth Circuit is still weighing arguments. They're trying to starting here in a few weeks, go through it and probably do a deeper dive on it, really figure how it's going to go into effect, if go into effect at all, or see if it is something that's going to violate. And it's as of right now, as of the date we're recording this in January here, it's not required. I don't see that order being lifted based on what I've read, at least for several weeks. But
and the problem with it is that the intention. Again, things can start out well-meaning enough, but at least from the current political climate, the things that this really aims to fight are big sticking points for a lot of the, things that are being promoted out there by the different people of the current party, which is the Republicans. So, and a lot of the federal circuit judges, a lot of appointees came from the Trump administration. So the likelihood that maybe they, kind of go along with that, it's hard to say. So, with it being aimed towards terrorism, the things happening with drug cartels and things like that, it's tough to say of what we're actually going to see come of any changes to it. And how you could actually change this, because the thing that I also think is, what would actually be a change that would not affect everyone else? Like, I think as much as we like to kind of maybe pick on the people that are exempt from this, the carve out for the small entities is probably where this stuff lies. So is it kind of the best of what it is? Maybe. It's either kind of all or nothing. So we kind of have to hope for either it being stricken, or that there maybe really isn't much to be done about it if it doesn't just get fully, shot down.
Yeah, I mean, we'll time will tell to see where this goes. Like I said, I think it's mentioned earlier, if someone's already out there doing other things, I don't know how likely it is that they're going to comply or comply truthfully. And I guess that's where they're, like you said, I think that's where they're hoping to catch people and then go from there. Like you said, the Al Capone reference, that's going to what they use to then get into the rest of someone's business. But again, who are they really targeting? It's not the mom and pop, but that's where the burden the burden for this is falling on, again, people who aren't financially savvy. They're not savvy with computers to legal things. They're either going to have to pay somebody to do this for them, or they're going to struggle to do it themselves and do it incorrectly. And I think that's one of the concerns people have, obviously, in addition, primarily to just being, hey, I'm disclosing all my personal information to you through this website, whatever you said. Is it secure? Am I going to get hacked? Am I giving you information on me that you don't, is it really necessary? And the fact that people, states have filed lawsuits to get injunctions to prevent this from going in, that just shows that obviously there's a lot of concern from constituents out there and fighting through their states. It's just a matter, like I said, whether we see anything on a federal level, either from the incoming Congress or from the incoming administration to, just put an end to it.
Yeah, and also from the fact too, like, if this is disclosed information, like, especially in businesses, like maybe you have a certain corporate structure that is designed to limit liability or something, like, is this information then in turn going to have more exposure to things like subpoenas if you're getting sued for something? Like, at what point can, like, the information of this stuff get, clawed out? And again, there's a ton of what ifs out there.
Yep.
But again, to kind of bring this in for a landing, because again, we can kind of go in circles with the general.
But actually, something you just mentioned, just also to think about too, is that the whole slippery slope argument. Right now, when I filled it out, it didn't seem like it was that much information. But next year it changes a little bit. Next year they want a little bit something different, a little bit something more. They want you to do this. It's more of just trying to cut it off at the start, I think, is the genesis, as opposed to having something that starts out minor and not a big inconvenience and then turning into something that's a lot more intrusive. I believe that's really the genesis of it all.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that, and unfortunately, some laws have a tendency to start, easy enough, and then it turns into something that can be very problematic because now you have the foot in the door, right? You have that access and the like. So we'll probably continue to do some updates on this. Again, we mainly just kind of want to get it out there so people understand what this is, where it came from, who sponsored this, where it came from, the need to do this. If you have to do it, it's again, easy to do, which is good. It's not something super cumbersome. I would wager to guess if you have the ability to run your own small business, I have done it. You can absolutely do this. It is not anything that is incredibly difficult to do. But I would just encourage people, if you do fall into that category, probably go ahead and do it, because the government works at the speed of government. Who knows how long it's going to take for this to happen? And being on the wrong side of the Department of Treasury is not a position I think many people want to be in.
Nope, I would agree with that, Alex. Thanks for having me on as your guest today.
Absolutely, Scott. And again, we'll bring the listeners some more updates on this as it comes up. And again, we always do webinars and podcasts on current legislation, whether it was the stuff we've done on the Secure Act iterations and other things. So keep a weather eye on it. We'll keep y'all updated and hopefully keep y'all on the right side of this. But again, this has been a special edition of the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast. My name is Alex Perny. Thanks, Scott, for being on with us today, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you for tuning in to the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast. Tune in next week for more investing tips and strategies.
Want to hear more episodes of the Alternative Investing Advantage? Search podcast at advantaira.com and subscribe.